today's broadcast of Create a World is not live, and we'll talk about it in just a minute as to why, but it's got some pretty exciting implications in my mind anyway. So Create a World is a broadcast that a group of us have been doing together for maybe 2 years, I'm not sure, a year. That's part of sharing our conversations of what it is to create worlds and sharing our conversations amongst ourselves that we have amongst ourselves and that we have out with other people and who are also engaged in creating a world. And there's a lot of people out there who are doing that. As a matter of fact, I would venture to say that most people are always creating a world. That is a natural part of what it is to be human. It's just that it's not always conscious and aware activity. So today we have Janice Crinetti of the Fertile Voice and myself, Deborah Merchant of the Vital Psyche, with you today to talk about several things about creating worlds. Janice, over to you. Anything you want to say?
So just a quick explanation of the reason that we're not live is that we're working out technology issues related to how we can access live streaming. And the current configuration has Tantra at the center of that, and everything has to go through Tantra. And Tantra has been expressing for some time now that she feels like the configuration of that is off, that it creates a level of hierarchy that we do not want in the field of Create a World and the field of Tantra Mod. So we are working and exploring to figure out how to create a situation where each of us has equal access to live streaming. And so we are hoping that that will be sorted sometime in the next few weeks, month or so. And we should be back live in August.
Actually, hopefully before then, but it'll be how it is. It'll be how it is. But that notion of hierarchy is really important. That notion of hierarchy. Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so the thing is that when we were first evolving as humans and as we evolved enough to the point to really start to be conscious about societal structures, in many tribal communities that were sort of our earliest type of community, power was distributed among the people. Now you might have somebody, who made the primary decision about this, or somebody that made the primary decision about that, but the idea that there was a king or a queen, that wasn't how it worked. And then we entered a period of human history where that was the dominant structure. And this notion of sort of classes and categories and higher ups and lower downs and all of that stuff evolved. And I mean, I suppose you could argue that it served its purpose for what it was, but here in Create a World and in the field of Tantra Mat, where we are holding for the restoration of the one soul human, that really means that that access equal access is distributed. And every person has the opportunity to bring what is theirs to bring. Every person contributes their unique and essential design to the whole, without the restrictions placed on, because, once you start assigning these categories and these labels, everybody's restricted. Right? I mean, it might
That's
look
true.
like a king or a queen has ultimate power, and yet actually
Not
they
really.
are being restricted by that role. And so what we want to do is open up the barn doors um so that everybody can show up the way their soul is calling them to, so that we can create a world that works for everybody.
Yeah, that's brilliant. As you're talking, I realize, many leadership roles, when done really well, I imagine the leaders were aware or are aware of holding a field, holding uh, holding a configuration and integrity, energetic integrity of the village, the kingdom, here, this create a world, which is what Tantra did in the beginning and still does. So first we're having a functional uh, hierarchy getting dismantled, because she's the one, even though we tried several different things so that we could all have access and do the recordings and go straight live to YouTube, it wasn't working. So it pigeonholed her in a functional hierarchy. She's the one who had the keys to the door, so to speak. And now things have changed again in her life and the life of others that make it essential that that functional hierarchy is gone. But there are hard, and that points to some evolution. We're going to talk about some evolutionary ideas possibly too. But that points to um, the the energetic holding of a space, and I think that has up leveled also in Create a World. That each of us is, by design and necessity, each of us is uh, really holding the space for this conversation, multifaceted conversation, to keep going and keeping this time as sacred until or unless something shows us that it's appropriate to shift time and place. So that's a couple different ways that hierarchy had been in place by design or uh, function. And it's good that the restrictions are being dismantled, restrictions on Tantra and the restrictions on the rest of us. So it's really kind of cool.
Indeed.
So what does that have to do with evolution? For me, I love to think about evolution. And not too long ago, I don't remember what it was that occurred, but something occurred. And, of course, I had to respond and engage and so forth. And it had me realize, oh, I'm an active participant in evolution, which means everybody's an active participant, or maybe a passive participant if we're not consciously aware. I'm not sure about that. But the idea of evolution being something well beyond what Darwin proposed. And to be fair to Darwin, we quote him as survival of the fittest as being his overarching theory. Well, that was just one quote when he was trying to describe his work. Somebody latched onto that phrase and it's become the description overarching. And that's not what he intended. It's a piece of it, but not all of it. And first off, that means our awareness of his work has been very redacted. And second off, it was just one uh, theory, one body of work to the nature, because he also did to the nature of evolution. He also wrote a book about the evolution of emotions in human beings, and uh, and of course, in at the height of the Victorian era, this book really fell like a lead balloon about sexuality in humanity. But and it was quite revolutionary for the times, both of them, both of them.
Yeah, and
So
Deb, I just want to insert really quickly that even the use of the word fittest is the problem is the way that we interpreted it, because the
wow.
way he meant fittest was best adapted to the current environment. Whereas we, especially in Western culture, we tend to associate fit, like fit, physicality, right?
Yeah, the biggest. Oh, wow, that is great. Yeah, yeah. Because I remember growing up learning those ideas in school. And okay, well, if this mouse can eat these seeds and the seeds evolve and the other mice can't, then that's the way the colony
Right,
goes. The ones that can eat it and process that food, that new food, are the ones that continue.
right.
And I thought back then, well, okay, but that's not everything. But I couldn't think it beyond that. And now, of course, but that's an excellent point. So, uh, with regards to this broadcast, Tantra's begun to be able to travel again. She's on travel. And other times when she's been on travel, there's been a way for her to stop and um, uh, hook us all into YouTube and we could go live as usual. But this time it was too unwieldy and she would have had to sacrifice some well-being and, stress out about it somehow or be stressed by the process. So she said, I can't do it. And so we figured this out as an intermediate because it's important for us to connect with you all. It really matters. And I thought, isn't that interesting? Well being forced a change as, as an evolutionary process. And that's what your whole one woman show is about, in a
Mhm.
way,
Yeah,
that well being, which is a very multifaceted conversation, multidimensional conversation, really forced a change
I'm feeling the need to grab my word.
to do what? Oh,
To grab my word.
oh. So I found that to be striking. And then I had several things occur in the last week, which were very welcome resolutions of specific things. And I call those things blessings. Blessings in my world, according to what I have come to understand, are elements that empower one to prosper, whatever the domain is. I know most of us think of it as a religious term, but it's not accurate. It's a functional term, it's an operational term. And miracles are like one-time interventions from spirit. Doesn't mean it'll never happen again, but that specific one is like, here we are to save the day kind of thing in an interaction with the energies and forces that are greater than us. And so those things happened, but there was not fallout. Fallout's not the right word. What's the word I want? Um, I don't know. I can't think of the word. But I had to do stuff to tend to those events, to welcome them in, to accept the resolution and fit it in my life. And that reminded me of when I moved out to California for my internship. That was such a huge blessing because I needed the internship. I wanted it. I was excited to move to California. We had to really work hard. There was lots of conversation, lots of engagement to raise the money to move, all kinds of activity for closing house. Everybody knows what it takes to move, and it can be a lot. And we were going 2/3 of the way across the country. And that really started me thinking. And then once we got here, all the activity to set up house, get ready for everything that was about to transpire. And I thought, it is amazing to me how much more work blessings take than crises in a
Mhm.
certain sense. And and we're much more acclimated to things going wrong. They've we've folded that in, I had at least, and I observed that around me. We we have folded that in somehow to our expectations, uh, how we live life. And then I kind of forgot about it until this set of stuff that we're talking about today. And I started thinking again, what if? So for me, the ideas around evolution is we're active participants. Blessings take a lot of stewardship. And then what if they're not isolated events? Like I at least interact as if they're isolated events, not the same. I don't want to diminish blessings at all, but the same, like I have to brush my teeth every day. That's folded in activity. I cook dinner every day. I feed my dogs every day. And feeding my dogs is not, it's sacred. I don't always want to get up and do it, you know, but it's sacred to me. And especially during the time when my dog was sick and she wasn't eating. So I think of that every single time that I
Mhm.
feed her, that it's so wonderful. So what if blessings and miracles are meant to be an everyday, not, this is hard to put words to it, Janice, without sounding like I'm diminishing it.
But I know what you're saying, Deb. It's the idea that it's part of the fabric.
Thank you. There we
Yeah,
go.
yeah.
Part of the fabric of life, the same as collecting firewood, brushing my teeth, whatever else, studying for exams, doing my work project, all the other things that we consider important, the humongously important stuff that goes around raising kids, that's part of the fabric of life. That's a brilliant way to say it. Thank you. Thank you. And part of our active participation in evolution is when we fold that in, blend in the results of those events into our daily life, then the trajectory is changed just a little, or maybe a lot, depending on the event. So to me, the two are related. The hierarchy, the changes in create a world, I'm seeing it as an evolutionary occurrence.
Right, moving to the next greater whole.
Yes, yes, absolutely. Absolutely. Which includes, for those of you who may not know or remember, kind of the basic principles of creation, the spiral nature of creation that's part of our background of thinking as a model that works. I happen to think it applies to everybody, but it's a model that those of us in this cultural wisdom community works off of. So part of everything's moving to the next greater whole, there's also everything's always expanding and contracting, deconstructing, constructing. Do you remember it, Janice? What's the
Going into existence and
thank you, in and
yeah,
out of
yeah.
existence, right? And that's, but even as it goes, something goes out of existence, it's already been included in whatever's next. It's already embedded in the fabric of whatever's next. So, in a certain way, it never goes out of existence. Plus, there's quantum physics, and but as a uh, distinct entity or experience, it may go out of existence. Well, like all the events of your childhood, for example, they're all folded in and part of who you are, but they're no longer distinct entities in and events in your life. So that's a lot of what's come up for me. It started as a simple thing. How do we make Create World go live? And here I've got this whole thing. But that's how it's occurring for me.
Well, and I think it's important to acknowledge that life is complex.
Yeah.
I mean, the human body is complex. Communities are complex.
Yeah.
The nature of existence is complex. And I think so often we beat ourselves up and say things like, "Oh, I should have been able to figure this out by now. I should have, should. We should on ourselves all the time." Um, and yet what we're dealing with incredible complexity, and honestly, we're dealing with incredible complexity before we even begin to pay attention. But then
Oh, yeah.
when we begin to pay attention and we start to become aware of the level of complexity that we're interacting with, like that's a whole nother ballgame. Um, you know, trying to show up every day as an authentic human being is that is a big thing. Um, and it's not we're school teacher, 35-year school teacher. We don't teach that in schools.
No.
We don't teach the most challenging parts of being human in schools. And
No.
so most of us are left to just figure it out on our own. I mean, if we're lucky, we have, somebody in our life who shepherds
Yeah.
us. But there's a whole lot of figuring out on our own that we've had to do. And part of Create a World is to create the transparency where we share what's going on for us. So that you can hear us say, well, gosh, I'm trying to wrap my brain around this. I'm trying to make sense out of that so that you can understand, oh, I'm not the only one over here trying to figure this out.
That's such an interesting point about the complexity. I wonder, and some of it will probably always remain outside of awareness, like, all the autonomic functions of our body, for example. Um, and I'm just kind of thinking of all the places I go on autopilot during life, and there's no apparent repercussions for being on autopilot. Um, like it helps me get to whatever else I need to not be on autopilot about. But then that moment when you start becoming aware of how complex life is, wow, I, wow, what do people do? Do they either, because I mean, I think like what the stuff I just shared is, I think like that all the time. So in a way, I like the complexity, but in a certain way, in my external world, I like it very simple.
Mm.
Hmm. But what do people do when they wake up? Do they just fold back in if it's overwhelming? I suppose there's not one response.
Well,
I'd say even,
right, and
go ahead.
I think it's the distinction between conscious and unconscious, right? And how much, like you were saying, you know, how much we do sort of on autopilot that we're not aware of. And so to me, part of the evolution then is shifting the unconscious to conscious.
But let's take well-being, because if I had to get up and get to work every day by 8 o'clock or earlier for a lot of people, depending on your profession, your and your work, and if I thought I had no choice, the minute, hold on, I'm trying to sort this. The minute I made a change, like, uh, let's say getting there by 7:30, 8 o'clock is too much with other conditions in my life. So I'm going to negotiate for 8:30 or 9 o'clock. Then the well-being forces a ripple effect
Mhm.
that also activates a lot of reactions, hopefully responses from people around you, but more likely reactions of judgments, opinions, and some people, it's not their business. They shouldn't be putting that into the mix in the first place. But for other people, like the boss or the coworkers, there might be an impact for changing. And a simple thing, hold on, I'm sorry, people, I'm just like thinking something like well-being is what started this, what drove up all the uh, unworkability already part of the creative world field. And it wasn't bad. I'm not, so unworkability just meant it didn't work. And we had compensated and adapted and sorted it out. And then, and everything was, so that constituted normal. And then there was an interruption with Tantra saying, I can't do that this time. It would be too much impact on my well-being. And the logistics of her travel would be, and the other people involved. So well-being from a bunch of definitions. And it activated a whole ripple effect. Now, for us, it wasn't bad. Nobody was reactive. It's just stepping in with, okay, then what has to be explored, examined, and action, so forth and so on. So it's a collaborative, uh, there's a grace and ease to it. We're a little bit stuck about all of us having access to going to YouTube Live, but it's an engagement that's collaborative and life enhancing, even if it's a little challenging. So I'm just looking at, again, like you pointed out, the complexity of entering a change, even as simple as well-being. It's no wonder that we orient, it's in a certain way easier to orient to uh, the other lack of well-being. Oh, I got sick, and all the systems that take care of sickness and or respond to sickness, let's say it that way. I'll try to be. Wow.
Well, yeah, and from the physics of it, it takes less energy to maintain, you know, the current track, right? I mean, if you're driving, and you gotta go up a hill, you gotta accelerate, you're gonna burn a little more gas. If you're sailing and you want to go the right or left, you gotta get wind energy, in your sails to help you move the direction that you want to move in. So I think we underestimate the degree to which our physical system can encourage status quo.
But that branches out to, our physical system, like this earth suit, and then all the systems in place out in the family, friends, society, workplace that are all adapted to that status quo.
Right.
And the status quo changes for some reason, and that throws a monkey wrench, that throws,
Right.
and then there's the option to respond collaboratively or not.
Right. Carolyn Mace always points out that this is why individuals evolve at a faster rate than institutions.
Can you say more about that?
Yeah, so and I saw it all the time in the public schools. So, let's say there's some, new piece of something. It's like, oh, when you do this with kids, you increase the effectiveness of the learning. Ooh, so for one teacher to say, ooh, interesting, I'm gonna try that out tomorrow, right? That's pretty easy. But if all of a sudden, in Florida, we have huge school systems. I mean, we have 4,000 plus schools across the state. Um, and we have high schools that have 3,000 kids in them, I mean, so we have our school systems and our schools and everything are really big. And so if all of a sudden, one district with, 100 plus schools wanted to say every teacher's now going to do this thing, the amount of energy and time and resources that would have to go into making that happen is substantial. And so because there's so much mass associated with institutions, moving that mass takes a lot more energy
Mm-hmm.
than, moving the mass of one individual.
But there's a lot of trainings and policy enactments and um, this is how you're going to teach and curriculum engagements that are occurring anyway.
Right.
That's all happening anyway. So instead of saying X, you just bring in and it's now Y. And I'm asking it for the physics of it, what you're hearing because the same could be true for well-being. Like when women, there's a few places, I don't know how, it's not common everywhere, but there was a time that uh, women began to do, uh, people could begin to do flex time in their work to accommodate their families' needs and, the well-being that goes with that. And daycares connected to work and things like that. So why not just slip the new stuff in on the existing structure? Oh, okay, I hear you.
Again, it's because I think we underestimate complexity. I mean, like, I can't tell you the number of times as a teacher, I've been in a school or something, and, we have what we call pre-service, which is the week that the teachers are back, but the kids aren't back yet. And there's all these meetings, and it's always a time of, well, this year, and then, and and if you were oiling a machine to put out more widgets, sure, no problem. But you're not. You're this complexity of this human and this complexity of this human and this complexity of this human are now bumping into each other, and all the complexities are churning up all this stuff, and it's not quite so easy anymore.
Yeah, it's not. You're right. You can't, like in World War II, where they took toy factories and retooled them to produce materials needed for the war effort. You're right. It's not the same. You're absolutely right. Because there's the complexity of belief systems, uh, egos. What would that do to my sense of self-importance, my sense of being needed and important, and my sense of, oh, that's too much work, I don't want to do it. I mean, yeah, the complexity of, yep, okay, huh. So that, in terms of evolution, it forced an evolution in your individual life that we don't know how long it's going to be before that feeds back into a system you did love. We don't know that. Or in what way. Wow. And for you, the stewardship, well, maybe I should speak for myself, because at the time of when I left an organization that I was working with, it was driven by health issues. Now that's a lot of complexity, but it's turning out to be a good thing for a lot of reasons. But I'll never have any direct influence in that particular arena again. I don't know if I want it anymore, but I did for a while. But the stewardship, it didn't occur as a blessing in the exact minute. It only took about a week before it occurred as a blessing when I had to leave. But the stewardship of that change, it was my choice to go, I guess, against the grain and not fall into the systems already adapted to a particular kind of stewardship of sickness. And that's what's occurring, what I see occurring with you having left the educational system. The stewardship of that has been massive for you and didn't always occur as life enhancing. But who knows what is going to be the actual impact of your one woman show, these kinds of conversations, and any other areas where you have even the slightest bit of influence. Hmm. So even when I talk about the stewardship of blessings and miracles, that's a lot more complex than I was thinking. Hmm.
Because all of it, also lives in here, right? And this is why the way that we think about things and the way that we talk about things matters, right? Language matters. Um, Even in terms of, like you were saying, being able to name something as a blessing. Because if we go with this definition here, right? Well, according to this definition, it's not, well, but according to a broader definition, it is. Um, for me, it was a question of recognizing that there was a certain amount of energy that I was expending. I had early on in my career, I had a principal say to me, "Oh, well, just wait till you're an assistant principal, you'll understand." And I said, "I will never be an assistant principal." And the person said, "Of course you will." And I'm like, "No, listen to me now. Listen to what I'm telling you. I've watched what you people have to do, and I have no desire to be a salmon swimming upstream." And yet,
Right.
and yet at the end of my career, I every day felt like the salmon swimming upstream. And it's like, okay, so I have this energy, um, and I can keep investing it in swimming upstream,
Mhm.
or I can invest in finding a stream where perhaps I can flow with it instead of against it.
Yeah. And the salmon are driven to swim upstream for a very important life enhancing process.
Right.
And that's not replicated in assistant principalship activity according to how you see it. My supervisor used to tell me that I should start applying for uh moving up the management jobs. And I said, I'm a clinician. I'm not a manager. I mean, I can sort of see the value of it. I don't know if I would want it, but I can see more of his perspective. But again, it was the same thing. It was that's what you're supposed to do. And there's a lot of questions I didn't ask about, well, why did you say that? That would have been useful to ask but it was that assumption, like, of course you would, of course you should. And no, that's not my nature. Hmm. And we do forget that. In nature, the salmon swim upstream for a very specific purpose to perpetuate the species.
And it is understood that they will use all their life force energy in doing that.
That's right, they will die.
Right.
They'll lay their eggs and die. But I don't think they object to that.
Because that's
I,
their
I mean,
unique and essential design.
yes, right. And it's not the same, but again, it's a complexity. There's a lot of things about human life that's, well, that's just the way it is, or it's just the way it's done, that's not necessarily life enhancing. But that's for each of us to evaluate, like you just said, about your own choices and mine. And then there's a lot of engagement when our choices are not in the established direction.
Right.
And it's really, really cool when we're reading about some heroine or hero that bucked the system and went their unique way. When we're reading those stories, at least for me, and living it out's a little more complicated.
Which doesn't mean it's wrong.
Or
And so I
bad.
think, right, and so I think that's a, that's a critical piece of the conversation that we're having today, is that we, especially in the United States, which is where I'm born and raised, so that's only how I can speak to, but there's sort of this notion that, like, if you're smart enough and capable enough, and you're going to do something and everything's going to work right the first time, and you're never going to run into any problems, and right, I mean, hogwash. So just be, so if you are in the process of making a change, if you are in conscious evolution and you run into roadblocks, it doesn't mean you're doing something wrong
Right,
or
correct.
bad. It means you're experiencing a natural part of the process.
Mm-hmm. Because there's the piece of everything's always deconstructing. That's not the same as destructing. Deconstructing, and everything's always constructing at the same time. And deconstructing is, I always like to use the metaphor of when you box up your house, pack up to move. You're deconstructing one household. And then here we moved to California, unpack, get new furniture, whatever we did to set up a new household. That's construction. That's a real simplified metaphor, but most of us have moved at least once and we can get it. Yeah, that's true. That's true. It's not necessarily simple or running into roadblocks is not doesn't mean you're doing anything wrong. I like to look at things on YouTube, the YouTube shorts, and pick ones that are from lifestyles of that I'll never do this lifetime. And I came across a couple about being a rancher.
Hmm.
Well, these people love it. They love being a rancher. And they absolutely adore it. And the things that go wrong are what ends up in the YouTube shorts. And stuff can go wrong like crazy, but it isn't, it's part of the movement. It's part of the flow of that universe. That's a really good point, Janice. Which I think is why we really need community to keep us reminded of that. Even the moments in community with, a friend or whatever the group is, where everybody sits around and says, yeah, and yeah, this bad thing happened, that, and you're swapping stories, but it's in a way that keeps everybody refueled and just makes it okay to be in the experience for a few minutes. It's not a pull downward. It's just like, okay, let's just express it and share the experience and Yeah, back up again.
Mhm. Beautiful. So we want to thank you for being in on our conversation whenever you listen to it.
Yeah,
And we're going to continue to bring our musings to share with you. And we would love for you to interact with us
yeah,
on Create a World Facebook.
yes. Please do, especially because it wasn't live today and there was no way for you to do a chat. And I'm really feeling that. I'm really missing that
Mhm.
today. So there, no way for you to put any questions or comments into the chat. And so that makes it even more important to infuse the field with what's moving through you on Facebook, the Create a World Facebook.
Thanks for being with us today.
Yep. Thank you. Bye.